Desde a antiguidade, o homem tenta entender como isso começou. Filósofos, alquimistas e biólogos passaram séculos tentando definir o que nos separa do que não é vivo. Os gregos acreditavam que a vida tinha origem em elementos básicos: terra, ar, fogo e água. A Bíblia e depois a ciência defenderam a ideia de que a vida tenha se originado do barro, da proximidade, como essa aqui, da água com a terra. Com descobertas da química, da física e da biologia, passamos a acreditar que a vida depende da combinação de 6 elementos químicos: oxigênio, carbono, hidrogênio, nitrogênio, enxofre e fósforo. Esses seriam os blocos fundamentais para a formação de todas as criaturas, de dinossauros a seres humanos, aos mais simples organismos. Mas a descoberta por uma equipe da NASA de um micro-organismo em um lago da Califórnia mudou tudo o que sabíamos sobre as condições necessárias para a existência da vida na Terra e até fora dela. O Espaço Aberto, Ciência e Tecnologia hoje traz uma entrevista exclusiva com a astrobióloga que liderou a equipe responsável por essa descoberta, que muda a nossa forma de entender vida. O nosso programa está começando. A descoberta aconteceu no nordeste da Califórnia. O Lago Mono é rico em arsênio, um dos elementos mais tóxicos a todas as formas de vida. Exatamente neste ambiente, a doutora Felissa Wolf-Simon decidiu estudar algumas bactérias, entre elas a GFA-J1, um extremófilo, como são conhecidos os micro-organismos que sobrevivem em locais pouco propícios à vida. No laboratório, a GFA-J1 passou por um processo conhecido como diluição seriada. Ela foi alimentada em um meio cada vez mais pobre em fósforo, um nutriente essencial para a vida, e cada vez mais rico no venenoso arsênio. Ao analisar a bactéria, os cientistas tiveram uma surpresa. A bactéria não só sobreviveu e se multiplicou, mas a sua estrutura molecular se transformou. O arsênio substituiu o fósforo até mesmo no DNA da GFA-J1. Essa descoberta pode revolucionar a busca de vida em outros lugares no universo onde as condições químicas são muito diferentes. Mas as possibilidades maiores são aqui na Terra, onde as bactérias são a forma mais abundante de vida e uma só delas está mudando as regras da biologia.
Simple questions with a simple experimental design.
Aos 33 anos, a astrobióloga Felissa Wolf-Simon, além de cientista, é formada em música clássica, toca o oboé. Ela falou com exclusividade ao Espaço Aberto Ciência e Tecnologia e contou por que decidiu questionar um dos conceitos mais sólidos da ciência e quais as mudanças que isso pode trazer nas pesquisas sobre a vida.
All life on Earth requires 6 elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And it has those elements in things like DNA and RNA, which is your information technology of the cell, proteins, those are your molecular machines, and lipids, so that separates you from everything else. So those 6 elements in those 3 components of every cell of everything alive we've ever met on Earth. This microbe can substitute arsenic for phosphorus in its major biomolecules. So that suggests there's a possibility of doing business a different way, of an alternative type of biochemistry. But this is a normal microbe, it fits on our tree of life, and it's doing something extraordinary. It would be very surprising to us that there's a single microbe in the billions of microbes on Earth that can do this one very, very unusual thing. We suspect it's more widespread, and indeed we have other isolates in the lab yet to explore.
And then, what's the consequence? That you can train life to do things it doesn't normally do? That you can change life?
So we didn't induce this change. So we don't think that we caused this change to happen. We think that this is we know this was a naturally occurring microbe in Mono Lake, which is the lake that it's been isolated from. And we could test if this was something we induced, but we don't suspect. We suspect that the microbe is doing this in nature, And what we did is we ran an experiment to give a microbe that can do this an advantage. So we ran an experiment, so in a flask, in the medium of the flask, we added everything else a microbe might need to grow. So we took the mud and put it in the flask, and it had vitamins and sugar and everything else that a microbe would need to grow. But we didn't add phosphorus, and that's a normal experiment. That's the kind of experiment where it's a negative control, shouldn't grow. However, we didn't just not add phosphorus. We added a lot of arsenic, so a high dose of arsenic. And in that way, it's a very unusual experiment. It's almost a double negative. So you don't add something the microbe needs, and you add something that's very toxic. And so that was driven by our question, as science should be, I think. Is there a microbe on Earth that could substitute arsenic for phosphorus in its biomolecules? So, very simple question at some level. We wanted to run a very simple experiment. And that experiment would be give the microbe everything else it needs, or give the mud, right, the source of the microbes, everything else they wouldn't need, but leave out the phosphorus and add very high doses of arsenic.
Why did you choose this particular bacteria? Can you tell me the story of it? When did you happen by Mono Lake first?
So Mono Lake is kind of the end, or the most recent part of the story. I'd been thinking about this question for a few years. So I published a paper in 2009 that kind of details the hypothesis. How would this work? Is it possible? You know, the arsenic for phosphorus in a microbe. Why pick those two elements and that sort of thing?
Did you, because they're so close on the periodic table?
Absolutely. So arsenic lies just below phosphorus on the periodic table. And one of the interesting things about arsenic and phosphorus is that they have almost identical atomic radii. So the size of the atom is very, very similar. And so that struck me. And there was a number of other things that struck me in terms of the relationship between those two. So arsenic is toxic because it looks like phosphorus. That was fascinating.
It
fools our bodies, actually, absolutely.
So why Mono Lake?
Why Mono Lake? So Mono Lake is in Northern California, east of the Sierra Nevadas. It's an incredible environment. Mono Lake is 3 times the salt of seawater. It has a pH of 10. So it's already a very unusual...
It's toxic.
It's toxic. I wouldn't go swimming. And in fact, there's so much borate. You can almost wash your clothes in it. It's got so many salts.
Brine.
It's very briny, yeah. Mm-hmm. And when you're in the boats, it's about 100 square miles in area. Mm-hmm. It's a big lake. Mm-hmm. And so we take boats out to these islands, and if you get sprayed, you turn white from the salt. Mm-hmm. And it's not fun. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Mono Lake is a very well-studied environment by Ron Ormland and many others.
Nothing grows in it.
Oh, no, it's teeming with life. So Mono Lake has bacteria and algae and brine shrimp. Migratory birds come through. It's teeming with life. It's an incredible place, actually. And clearly that tells us what? That tells us that life is pretty amazing, that it could even survive this. Mm-hmm. But it's still an extreme. That's not the environment you and I deal with every day.
So you get to a place that has the substances that you've been curious about, but had you identified the bacteria already when you got there?
No, not at all. This is our question. Is there a microbe on Earth? Because that's what I have to work with as an experimental biologist. Is there a microbe on Earth that can substitute arsenic for phosphorus in its basic biomolecules? So we're going to hedge our bets. That's what we would say. We're going to go to an environment that's almost a natural experiment. For example, if you want to look for a microbe that can deal with a lot of heat, you go to somewhere hot. Really cold, go somewhere cold, etc. And so it's you don't need to be complicated in science. Sometimes the simplest question, to have a simple experiment, because data are often complicated. And if your question is complicated and the experiments are very complicated, it's, I think, more difficult to interpret data. That doesn't mean that in science we don't have to do that sometimes also. And the way we went about doing this is a very simple experiment. So let's say there's 10 glasses in front of me, and they're all filled with about 10 ounces or so of liquid. We're going to start with the furthest most glass and add, let's say, 1 ounce of mud to that glass. We'll mix it up, and in that glass is medium, so artificial lake water, and it has sugar, so it has everything else it needs, sugar, vitamins, but no phosphorus, and very high levels of arsenic. And we just let that sit a couple days to weeks. We're just watching for it to get cloudier. We take 1 ounce of that and put it into the second glass. And the idea is to do, it's called a serial dilution. So we put the 1 ounce into the second, that's a 1 in 10, 1 part in 10.
Right.
We let that glass now sit for a few days to weeks. We're looking just for some sort of activity. And the first few glasses, what you'll see is that normal microbes are around. Remember, you're coming in with mud. There's a lot of stuff in that. Mono Lake, I'll say, is not a low phosphorus lake. It's got plenty of phosphorus, but it has high arsenic. And what we wanted to do is just run the experiment, because most of us thought nothing's going to happen, so try it, because it's very, what we say in science, low activation energy. Just try the experiment.
Just to make sure.
Doesn't work, doesn't work. And that's still informative. It's not very interesting, but it's still interesting. It's informative. So we did that serial dilution over time.
So phosphorus concentrations are getting
lower and
lower and lower and lower, and arsenic?
Well, the arsenic is the same throughout, right?
Right, you're just diminishing phosphorus.
That's right. The idea is to lose the memory of the lake, right? The memory of the chemicals of the lake.
Right.
So at some point after we've done the serial dilution, we then take that last glass, let's say, and take a little bit of it and spread it on a plate. And we've all, I think, seen pictures of these agar plates.
Right.
And because what we want to do, something was still growing, and that was the amazing part. The initial amazing part was at that transfer. We call those transfers. It makes sense. Transfer from one thing to the next.
You have almost no phosphorus or no phosphorus. There is still
no
growth.
added, right? There might be this trace contaminant, a trace impurity that's hard to get rid of, but there's no added. So it's essentially zero to us. And at that point, we then take a little bit of the liquid and just spread it out on a plate, which is made of like gelatin.
Right.
And any microbiologist will tell you that you shouldn't get anything interesting from the environment on a plate. And sure enough, we got colonies. So we got little cells growing. And then what we could start doing, because what we wanted to do is understand if there's something still growing in that last transfer. I have no idea what it should be dead. It's a double negative experiment. And something was still growing, fast moving little microbe. So we wanted to isolate that from the other, like make sure it was a single microbe.
What was the day that you realized that this was something unique?
I think I'm my biggest skeptic, and I respect some of my colleagues who are skeptics. I think, though, I'm pretty hard on the data. And every new technique that a colleague of mine that I am convinced maybe they should take part in the project, every new piece of data, I thought, well, this will be the piece of data that doesn't make sense. Or that's, they have no arsenic in the cell, for example. That would have been a result, and I would have said, okay, we're done. But in fact, they had tons of arsenic in the cells. So then we went to other techniques. Well, if it's in the cell, what part of it? We can pull the cells apart. And it seemed to be in a variety of the parts. That's interesting. And then we went on to really try to characterize it. And I will say that the data are what they are. In other words, our current way of interpreting our data, so the arsenic is inside the cells when grown on arsenic with no phosphorus. The arsenic seems to be in all those 3 components of the cells I spoke about. So these are the DNA, RNA, the proteins, and the lipids. And then we actually looked at a purified band of DNA, and there was arsenic associated with it.
So theoretically, you are, or at least you can suggest that you had a substitution.
It seems unbelievable to me, because I think the chemistry doesn't make sense, but life can do a lot of things that don't make sense to us in a purely chemical terms. So what really did it for me is the number of types of experiments all contributing to the same answer. Does that mean we could be missing something? Possibly. I think we know in science that when new techniques come out, they often open up world of possibilities. We're not talking about a new technique. We're actually opening up possibilities, looking at life in a different way.
What then? If life can be so adaptable, if life can live and thrive in what essentially is a poison for us, or we believe is a poison for every life, what then? What's the consequence?
I think it tells us a few things. The first is that there's so much possibility for life that you don't just need carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Maybe that's not a constant. That would be really profound if that were true. And our data suggests that maybe that is true. Maybe it's that the 3 components of life, DNA, RNA, so nucleic acids, proteins, and lipids, maybe those are also something that isn't fixed in stone. I think many of us wouldn't argue that 1 + 1 = 2. That seems to be a pretty solid fact.